pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Does this remind you of anything? Why, of course you recognized him. It's Adenoid Hinkle, the Fooey of Tomania.
Captain.
I bet you recognized him, too. It's Charlie, the wonderful, the extraordinary Charlie Chaplin. By a strange trick of fate, the ruthless dictator and Charlie resemble each other like two peas in a pod, except that while Adenoid Hinkle makes millions of people tremble, Charlie makes them die of laughter. And now for the other great characters in our story. Benzino Napoloni, the dictator of bacteria. Here is Field Marshal Bismarck Herring, Hinkle's right hand. Herr Garbage, his left hand. And finally, the little barber. And Hannah, the lovely, brave Hannah.
The pod bay doors are open. Welcome once again. I am your host, Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com. Here with a special guest, Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairCinema.com, ArmchairOscars.com, and OverThinkingOscars.WordPress.com in a dual role. He's playing Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairCinema.com and Armchair Oscars, and also Jerry Dean Roberts of OverThinkingOscars.WordPress.com. How are you today, Jerry?
I'm fine. I may not be the emperor of the world, but with all my websites and blogs, I'll soon be the emperor of the internet.
It's hard to pick a quote from this one. Today we're doing the Great Dictator.
I had to think about it, because it's not the most quotable movie in the world.
It's not. Unless you're going to, like, verbatim do the end speech, and that's like 5 minutes. So we're talking about the Great Dictator because last week marked the birthdays on April 16th of Charlie Chaplin and on April 20th Adolf Hitler. So why not celebrate the genius and skewer the madman?
They were born 4 days apart.
Right.
In
Same year.
89.
Yeah, same year, everything. So this was the obvious choice, I think, for me. This was my pick. So.
If you really look at it, you know, they were born 4 days apart. They were kind of, if you really start following the trajectory of their lives, it's not that far off.
It's not. It's one
You know?
One got to be the artist, and the other one got turned down from being an artist.
Right. Course of destiny.
Right. So how did you end up seeing this one for the first time?
If you are a film lover, you'll get to Chaplin.
Yeah.
Pretty early on. And I came to The Great Dictator on the year of his 100th birthday.
Oh, okay.
When Key Video did this wonderful series, this is still back in the days of VHS, this is 89.
Mm-hmm.
Key Video did this series of all of his films, and I had never seen a Chaplin film before. So I picked up City of Lights.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out to be one of the greatest movies I've ever seen in my life. And it's still
one of the greatest movies ever made, yeah.
It is one of the greatest movies ever made, and I'm still in love with it. We're going to make that an episode someday.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Adore that film. And I thought, you always when you discover a director, or you discover an actor, you always it's a gateway, and you open it
Mm-hmm.
up and you walk in, and it's like, okay, I want to know more about. I want to know what he's got. What else has he got? So I
Right.
think I went through the Gold Rush
Mm-hmm.
and um, I said the Gold Rush, and then I went through Modern Times, which I also love, and
Mm-hmm.
then I arrived at this. Now, if you follow the trajectory of his work, if you follow his feature films,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know this is coming,
Yeah.
it's a
This is
shock.
yeah, this is a huge this isn't what you would expect from Chaplin.
Because if I'm not mistaken, I believe the film he made before this was Modern Times in
Yes.
'36.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the film where he lays the tramp to rest. He retires the tramp.
More or less, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he, but like I say, if you go from all of these great films, and they're wonderful, and you see the tramp, and then you land at this, it's a cold water treatment.
It is.
Because especially if you don't know the time period,
Mm-hmm.
this was in the late 30s. This movie came out in 1940.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the late 30s, and I've always said that movies are a product of their time,
Mm-hmm.
of the times in which they were made, rather. And no film exemplifies that quite like this. I mean, because the movie is caught, excuse me, in a sort of time in which the world really did not know how evil Hitler was.
Right, right, right.
The countries of the world, um, still thought Hitler could be reasoned with.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see Darkest Hour, that's basically the time period that this takes place in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the powers that be, the powers of Parliament, still thought, well, we can still, um, he would honor the Munich Agreement. He would not make any more territorial claims. Well, we learned that wasn't happening. This was even right before America's involvement.
Yeah, this is well over a year before Pearl Harbor. Um, and it it's fascinating because he had actually set out his first talkie he had decided was going to be Napoleon.
Right.
Uh, uh,
He was obsessed with Napoleon, as was
yeah,
Kubrick.
yeah, yeah, and neither one of them ever got their Napoleon movie made. The only person that really succeeded on a grand scale was Abel Gance.
Right.
Um, so I mean, there were a couple of others, but really that's the one everybody knows.
Napoleon
Um,
seems to be the dream. A lot of directors,
yeah,
they want to make a film about Napoleon, and it just never happens.
right, right, right. Because most of the time they get a Napoleonic complex and then it just falls apart.
Falls apart. Well, Chaplin's idea was he wanted to do something a little more current.
Right. What he had on Napoleon morphed into
The Great
going
Dictator.
after, yeah, the Great Dictator and going after all of that. And he said after the war, after the concentration camps were liberated, after the world became aware of the Holocaust, he said if he'd have known the true depths of the travesties that were going on, he never would have made the movie because he didn't want to make fun of the situation and the massive death that was going on. Uh, his wife was Jewish, and he never confirmed whether he was or not, but the Germans decided that he was.
I
Um,
believe he was raised Catholic.
yeah, yeah, and he just didn't. He never said I'm not Jewish because I think he in a show of solidarity or a see it's not a bad thing, but
Yeah.
uh, he said he wouldn't have made it. And This and one of my other favorite comedies, To Be or Not to Be, were both done before.
The Ernst Lubitsch.
Right, Ernst Lubitsch one. Were done before the world knew about the Holocaust. Everybody just thought that they were in forced labor camps, which
Because
is bad enough, but
both movies use the term concentration camp
hmm
as a joke
yeah,
without anybody really understanding what that really meant
right,
and the connotation that it would have to us here in the 21st century. So when you're watching a comedy and you hear them glibly talking about the concentration camp, you're kind of like, ugh.
yeah. Well,
Little,
even when you're watching Casablanca, it's like, well, I've escaped from 3 different concentration camps. It's like, yeah, I don't think so, Victor.
yeah.
I
No, you didn't.
no.
He says.
Yeah.
Well, here's the funny thing about the Great Dictator. Now, I had only seen this maybe twice before, because it's not a movie that I'm willing to just kind of flip on and toss in the Blu-ray player and spend an evening with. You have to really be in the mood for it because it is a heavy film.
It is. It is. Despite how ridiculously hilarious it is, there are equal moments of uh, drama and just kind of sadness. It's really it's I think it's one of Chaplin's best expressions of his balancing of the dramatic and the comedic. This and City Lights.
I was surprised that he did not go immediately for the Hitler stuff.
Right.
Because the movie opens, excuse me, the movie opens at the end of the war, the end of the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this whole thing, there's this whole big comedy set, this whole big comedy setup that introduces us to this other character who, let's face it, it's the tramp.
It is. It is. It is.
He's called a Jewish barber. He's never given a proper name.
Right.
But we're dropped into these shenanigans going on. And what I thought of when I saw this is the first thing you see is there's a panning shot across this battlefield into this ginormous gun that looks like it comes out of a cartoon.
Yeah. I mean, this is like Shoulder Arms 2.
Yeah, it is Shoulder Arms. Essentially, he borrows stuff directly from Shoulder Arms, which was a film he actually made in 1980. Excuse me, but we're looking at the German side, and there's this whole thing about if the guys at Warner Brothers didn't borrow their animation from a lot of this, I'll be shocked. Because there's a lot of scenes in this movie that look like they came out of a Warner Brothers cartoon.
Yeah, I mean, the state of the art gun. But that gun. I mean, they're in. I don't even know where they were placed, but I know that they didn't get very far in World War I into France, but their target was Notre Dame, and they're like 60 miles away.
Right.
And they load it, okay, and he pulls a little string and it shoots. They're like, "Oh, we've got to adjust it." And he pulls it again and it clink 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 clink. And it just...
The first one, they blow up an outhouse.
Yeah. And the second shell's a dud. And they're like, okay, defuse it. And it keeps following him around.
Yeah, he's running around it until it starts sparking, and then it runs off and it blows up. If only duds would do that. Right. Half the time they would have to get some brave soul or some some extremely low-ranking private to go out there and just abuse it. Some guy with nothing to lose.
Right,
But,
right, right.
he ends up with this pilot who's wounded. Who, by the way, this has got to be the most lackadaisical pilot you've ever seen in your life, because he's trying to get communiques back to.
Oh, help me! Oh, I'm exhausted. Oh, can you fly this?
Trying to get him back to I think it's Stinkendoofen.
Yeah.
And there's a great scene where they're both in the same biplane, which I don't even know if you can do that, but they're in the same biplane, and they're upside down. But you're right side up.
Right. So the watch like goes up.
Yeah, he's got a watch on a fob, and it's just kind of hanging.
And then they try to drink water, and it just
Yeah.
goes out. Then they figure out that they're upside down.
I would not want to have been the guy who had to share a scene with Charlie Chaplin. Because nobody's looking at you.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Anybody that he ever shared a screen with, I'm talking about any male co-star, because any female co-star, maybe, but any male co-star, you're not looking at the other guy.
With the exception of what's his name from The Kid, the
Jackie
kid,
Coogan.
Jackie Coogan, because he was adorable enough to get some attention on him.
Right. But that poor guy in the gold rush that he spends time with.
Oh my gosh.
You're not even looking at him.
He might as well not even be there because he's
might as well be a broom.
Right, 'cause you barely remember that he's there, except for like the time I think that he hits him. I think oh yeah, there's somebody else in the room. Okay.
Yeah. But they're flying around in this airplane, and the pilot, his name is Schultz, gives up. And just decides that his fate is. And by the way, I think they're still flying upside down. And he just gives up. He's like, well, I guess this is the end. And that's how he says it.
Yeah.
I'll bet Hilda's tending the garden.
Right. He's getting all weepy for home, but and he ends up. They land and he's like, "Here's the dispatches." It's like, "But the war is over. We lost." Oh no! And that's when he becomes animated.
Apparently the war ended, and Germany surrendered while they were in the air.
Yeah, exactly.
While their shenanigans are going on,
Yeah.
But it was just interesting to me that the movie does not jump right into Hitler. Jump right into the Hitler stuff. It does build to this because you need the Schultz character because he plays a big part later.
Mm-hmm.
But they have this passage of time where all these things are going on in the 30-year gap between the two wars, and that's when you have the rise of Adenoid Hinkle. This foreign dictator of Tomania, and I mean it's
the double cross was his
under the sign of the double cross. Yeah.
Yes.
What's funny though is that I think this may be the first movie that ever put on a satire or parody of Hitler directly.
Well, yeah, because everybody was still kind of, like you said, they didn't want to tick him off because the economy in Germany was bustling when no other one was. Was mostly because he had turned it into a gigantic war machine that nobody knew about, and also had slave labor in the Jews and the people that he didn't like. So that was
knocked down their neighborhood.
Right. So there was
concentration camps on top of it.
Right. So there was less. There were fewer people that needed a lot of goods. So, but yeah, this was the first time that anybody directly went after him to make him look like the ridiculous person that he really was. Because, early on, you would see like silent films of him, silent newsreels, and he looked like an idiot.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
looked like a clown.
just
And Disney did that all
swings.
the time.
Yeah, yeah. Later. Uh, but yeah, it was Chaplin. Like people were begging him not to make the movie,
Hmm.
and just because picking on a world
If it had
leader.
been anybody else, if it had been anybody else wanting to make this film, it wouldn't have gotten done.
No.
Because what happened was in the teens, he becomes a star.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes a popular actor. In the 20s, he becomes a movie star.
Mm-hmm.
By the time he gets to this film, Charlie Chaplin is a legend in his own time.
Right. He's the most popular entertainer of the time. His movies are events because he didn't do one a year. He took time. He took time to make films when it didn't take time to make films.
Right.
Like it's like
Studios had a movie a week to get out.
yeah, and that's almost how long it took to put one together. And but he took years between uh, his different films. Like the when you think about the cluster of his best known work, um, from say
Well, it was 4 years
City.
between Modern Times and this.
Right, and this is 9 years after City Lights, which was 6 years after the Gold Rush, which like I mean I think the circus was in between the Gold Rush and City Lights, but
It was 1927.
yeah, and that was 2 years, and then another 4 years, and you know the Gold Rush was 4 years after the Kid. Like he was doing shorts and stuff, but his features are really spread out.
Yeah, because he took time
Um,
to get it right.
right, exactly, and
And he wanted to skewer this because Hitler was making the world nervous,
mhm.
and it was important for him to talk about it because it was insane. What was happening was um, he was trying to say with this film, this is not some monster god who comes down from whatever and just terrorizes it. This is a clown.
Mhm.
And that's really what the satire is in this film. It's 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 satirizing the pomposity and all of that stuff that goes on with it, with Hitler's um, machinations and the people he has around him and his sycophants. It's skewering all of that,
Yeah,
but there's a subtext to it. It's not simply tweaking the nose, and he does do that
he
because
does.
I love his address
Mhm.
where. And by the way, I think the Tomanian was ad libbed.
Mm.
The language that he uses. I could
Oh
never.
well, there's a whole lot of ich Viking sauerkraut in der
Yeah,
Schweizgewohnte.
right.
It's fake German, and the
I mean, there are German words in there.
there are.
I love how they call him Der Fui.
When he
Der
falls down
Fui.
the, yeah, der Flui. Where's the banana? Where's the
Yeah.
banana?
And he gets so into his speech that the microphone starts bending.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was going after that, and the idea that Hitler was such a buffoon, and so were the people around him. This was a
Jack
circus.
Oki's Napoleoni, the Mussolini character.
He does not come into the film until probably about an hour and a half, but he is
Oh
hilarious.
yeah,
He's basically
it's
doing
near the end, but oh my god.
basically doing Chico Marx.
Yeah.
You know.
He's the only one that holds his own with Chaplin on
Yeah,
on
he
the
is.
screen,
He is.
and
Everybody else is just a. Everybody else is just
a
everybody else
placeholder.
is just a stooge for a placeholder.
Yeah.
I love his um, again with the Warner Brothers style, animation style thing. There are things you could imagine being done in a Warner Brothers cartoon. Like I love it when he, on a dime, he turns on his herring,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and he's got this uniform covered with medals, and he just starts picking them off. He's angry, and he starts just picking them off, and then
And
starts
the
pulling off
buttons.
buttons. It's just but there's also this. As much of a clown as he makes Hinkle, he does not shy away from making Hinkle at least threatening. At
Yes.
least you sense that Hinkle is an evil man.
Because he's giving the orders when he's in the Jewish ghetto depicting the stormtroopers.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the evil comes out. His the orders that are being carried out.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're one on one with him, he's ridiculous. This is one of the a great expression of his Chaplin saying that when you look at the same situation up close, it's comedic, and from a distance, it's comedic, and up close, it's dramatic. It's tragic. This is exactly it. When you're with Hitler or Himmler or Hinkle,
Hinkle.
he's this ridiculous figure. Like you're watching him, and everything he does is like kind of bumbling and stupid. But when you get down into where it's affecting people's lives, you see these stormtroopers pushing and beating and burning down houses and the shop and really kind of terrorizing people. That's the up close. That's how this guy, this clown, is affecting people's lives.
Yeah.
Instead of
He
him
has a
just being
scene where
funny.
he turns serious and he says, "I'm not going to direct today's address to the people of Tomania. I'm going to address it to the children of Israel."
Mm-hmm.
And then you get this scene where the people in the ghettos are hearing Hinkle's speech, and you don't know what he's saying, but it's this really volatile, violent.
And then the translation, His Excellency has just addressed the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Which,
but you get the feeling it's yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It would have been so easy for Chaplin to soft soap this, but it was important because of the statement he was trying to make, that he make the situation understood, that even in a satire, it's still a dire circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And he has, as a resistance point, this wonderful and I think forgotten performance by Paulette Goddard as this resistance fighter who is resisting the stormtroopers.
Vehemently and violently.
And violently. And she's building, along with this Jewish barber, the other Chaplin performer, and a few others, building this resistance, this small resistance to Hinkle and his massive machinations, which eventually includes Schultz, which they have to hide out.
Right. Because he's been arrested for basically being soft on the Jewish ghetto, because he said nothing's going to happen to the Jewish barber because he saved his life.
He saved his
So
life.
it's
He was
like,
the guy in the biplane.
right, anything that he does, he can do whatever he wants, and you're not gonna mess with people in this courtyard, which are his
They're gonna hang
friends.
him.
Yeah,
They're gonna
yeah.
hang him.
They've already got the rope on him and everything.
Well, it's also you see what's happening to the people in the Jewish ghetto, but it's also cut in with these scenes that let you know that Hinkle is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a scene, and it is probably one of the most brilliant and frightening things I've ever seen on film, where Hinkle is alone in his office, and
Oh.
he goes over to his globe, and he says something that really stuck in my brain. He says, "Emperor of the world."
Mm-hmm.
Let that phrase sink in. Emperor of the world.
Right, and
You have to
yeah,
have an absolute bend in the brain to have that kind of vision for yourself.
right. Who wants the? I mean,
It's like
any
something out of a comic book.
yeah. Well, Hitler kind of was a comic book villain without a comic book hero to stop him. Uh, he it and that globe uh,
Oh
is a
my God.
represent that globe is a representation actually of one that was actually in Hitler's office,
Yeah.
because there were pictures released, and after the end of the war, the only thing that was left intact in his office was that globe.
And Hinkle picks up this balloon and he bounces it around, he twirls it, and he plays it lovingly.
He does this dance with it to
Ballet.
like, and he's spinning it on his finger, like he basically takes on the role of Atlas, but instead of having to struggle with it on his shoulders, it's lighter than air, and he's bouncing it and playing with the world.
And the world is his. It is all his. It is in his hands.
And then,
It pops.
yeah,
Yeah. And I believe this is what was in Hitler's mind.
mm-hmm,
They had a plan for taking over the world.
yeah,
Today Europe, tomorrow the world. I mean, this was their plan.
mm-hmm,
And again, the insanity of Emperor of the World. That
mm-hmm.
sentence has been burning in my brain since I saw this movie the other night. I was like, like I say, it sounds like a comic book villain. You know, you want to rule the world. You want to be the absolute ruler over every country on this planet. And it's that kind of insanity.
Yeah,
It's what Chaplin is going after. And
because he could see it.
yeah, he could see it. And the other governments of the world were like, well, maybe there's an alternative to war. No.
Yeah, he was he was Chaplin, or he was Chaplin was the Churchill of the entertainment industry.
Right.
Churchill was the only person that was like, this is a problem, and everybody's like, ah.
Yeah. Watch Darkest Hour again.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty accurate. I mean, you know, the people in the halls of power are like, he's just a guy. He can be dealt with. No, you can't deal with him except through war.
Right, and
Because you know,
the, when when Napoleone comes in, that whole thing that they're setting up a power move for Hinkle, and he just comes in and circumvents all of it. And one of my favorite lines, it felt like it was out of a Marx Brothers movie, uh, when
since he sounds like Chico.
well, no, I mean when Chaplin, when
Oh,
Hinkle,
yeah.
well, his advisor, let's see here.
Garbage.
Yeah, Garbage, Henry Daniell, is like, you should dance with Madame Napoleoni. It'll carry weight. And he's like, you mean I'll carry weight? And he thinks it's a great joke, and he starts laughing, and Garbage is just staring at it.
Garbage, who I think is supposed to be Gehring.
Yeah.
No,
Goebbels.
Goebbels, yeah.
Billy Gilbert plays Herring,
Yeah.
which is
Gehring.
I think yeah, Gehring. Billy Gilbert is the one that he's best known in my mind as Pettibone in His Girl Friday, the guy that's
The
trying
voice
to
of Grumpy and Snow White.
right. He was trying to deliver the pardon for Earl Warren, and he keeps getting shuffled around, and he goes, "Oh, if my wife could see, oh, like," and that was the same year that this came out.
Yeah.
He was one of those great comedic sidebar actors that you have to look up to know what his name is, but as soon as you see him, you're like, ah.
Well, this film fascinates me. Like I say, I can't watch it all the time because it's just, when you get to the end, it's a little too much. It's a little much to spend an evening with. But I sort of stood outside the film, and I was talking about this with, you sort of try to put your mind outside of it and try to understand the machinations of the creative instinct that went into it. And I was talking to it about this movie with a coworker of mine. And the question always comes up when you talk about Hitler. How did this happen? What in the world? How did he seduce an entire country into doing what they did? And it's all sort of here in the film, in these speeches that he gives, because it's all in the translation. Because I try to imagine, you're 18 years old. You're living in Germany. It's 1935. And you go to the movie theater. And you see, which is where you could see Hitler in his speeches. The films by Lied and Riefenstahl. And you could see Hitler on film. You could hear him because people heard him all the time. People heard his speech. He made sure through Goebbels that everybody heard his speeches all the time.
Oh, sure, yeah. He was all over the radio.
You're 18 years old. You're young. You're idealistic. You're impressionistic. You're you're open to ideas. And you hear this man, and he says, "Our enemies, they think we are the footmen of the world. And I will erase all that. We demand our place in the sun, which is rightfully ours, and I will lead you there. I will lead you there, I promise it." And you're carried along.
Well, yeah, I mean,
he had that seductive power.
It would just as easily be able to restage the classroom scene in All Quiet on the Western Front, which is also from the German perspective in World War I, and just replace it with, love of country with, Hitler, and you get why you could get where these kids would get all gung-ho about serving this. And you have to look at everything too from the perspective that the entire world was in a depression.
Right.
The stock market crash in 1929 affected the entire world. And so that happened, but Germany was under the heel of continental Europe because of, was it the Treaty of Versailles?
Right.
at the end of World War One, which basically made them pay back all these war expenses with money that they didn't have,
Hmm.
and uh, it basically brought Germany to a screeching halt. They're starving, and then the whole world goes under with the depression, so there's even less to go around, and so the time was right for someone to say, hey, look, this isn't our fault.
Hmm.
This is these people's fault. This is those people's fault. If we start bringing them together and getting rid of them, we will be able to overturn our bad circumstances, because
Hmm.
this is blaming this group of people, that group of people. It's not all that different from it's terrifyingly contemporary.
So it's just it's he's saying to these 18-year-old kids, these impressionable
Yeah.
minds,
Mm-hmm.
I'm your leader and I will lead you to greatness. I promise you.
Right. He'll
And
make
they're sitting
everything
there and
great again.
I'll make everything great. And then he takes
Sorry.
his tanks and his guns and he goes out into Europe and he makes it happen.
Uh huh.
He steamrolls over Czechoslovakia and Poland and France, and he did one right after another. So you're believing this man can do anything.
Yeah. Belgium fell in what, like 3 hours?
Yeah, something like
I
that.
mean, it's not like they had a great army to begin with, but he just kind of rolled through them and said, "Hey, this is mine now." It's like
And he was just
it
the
was like a
greatest
dog
PR
peeing on
machine.
something. It was
And he had the greatest PR machine.
yeah.
Now let's look at the other side. Look at the other side. You're a kid, you're 18 years old, and you live in America.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You live somewhere in Kansas or Pittsburgh or Birmingham. And you go into a movie theater and you see newsreels of this man with this stupid looking mustache in this uniform, and
Screaming
you
into a
hear this
microphone.
man on this newsreel. You don't speak German. All you hear is it sounds ridiculous.
And if
It
you
sounds
look at him, he's
stupid.
waving his hands and he's clutching his chest and he's I divide the take a He's like he absolutely, if he weren't one of the single most deplorable representations of evil ever put into human form, he would have been the funniest thing you could ever possibly hope to see.
Exactly. And then so it's easy to imagine the Americans understanding and thinking this guy is a clown.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this? This is a Superman villain. This is not a. But then you see that he steamrolls over Europe, takes over Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, and you're thinking, okay, I want to be part of the cause to knock this idiot off his throne
Right.
because he's crazy.
Yeah. Look at this idiot.
Yeah,
And
who is very likely to take over the world if he
he
has his way.
if yeah, he conceivably he could have, especially as he added more territory to his machine, his war machine.
Becoming
Uh,
emperor of the world.
right, and he could have done it because I mean he had most of continental Europe. He had parts of North Africa. He had allies in Japan that were wiping out the Chinese. Uh, that was their own. I mean, that was completely that hatred was very separate from World War II. The Chinese and the Japanese have never really particularly gotten along,
Yeah.
and this was a huge thing for Japan to strike back at, especially the Manchurian province. Um, One of these days, I'm gonna finally sit down and watch all of. I've seen the first part of the Human Condition,
Hmm.
um, which is incredible. It's the Japanese Gone with the Wind. It's like this 9-hour, 3-part epic Um, maybe eventually someday we might do an episode on it if you can find the time to watch it and I can find the time. I own it and I still have only seen the first part. But
Yeah.
that really documents the what the Japanese were doing in Manchuria. Interestingly enough, it was it was done by a Japanese director in the late 50s, so the wound was still fresh,
Yeah.
and he was not kind, uh, but that whole thing was going on, and he had the capability and the scientific minds, and he had everything that he needed, except the time to develop everything he would have needed to get the entire world under his thumb. If he'd have just waited like 3 more years and built up his industrial military industrial complex a little bit more, we might be speaking German.
Mhm. He did not want, as far as I know, as forgive me if I'm wrong, he did not want the United States in the war.
No, he wanted them as an ally. He wanted Britain and America as an ally. He saw those two nations as his Aryan brothers.
Which he referred to us as a mongrel nation.
Yes.
We are essentially, we're a mixed nation.
Yes.
In spite of our racism, in spite of our legacy of racism, we're not. How do I say this nicely? We're a mutt nation. You're not gonna. America. We started.
Well, but beautifully so, because
Yeah, but
I mean
beautifully so, and I mean that as
got
a positive.
we should be, we have been in the past and should always be uh the place for anybody to come to escape their
Tyranny.
misfortunate circumstances, any kind of unfortunate circumstances, a poor nation, bad economy, or tyranny or persecution of any kind. You know, this is where people should be able to go, and I'm have always been very proud of the fact that we aren't just like, you don't just look around and you don't just see one kind of people. You know, you see all kinds of religious and a-religious, different ethnicities, skin tones, just anything and everything, and
We
it's,
struggled with it.
well,
We
we still
struggled with it.
do. We still do.
Still do.
We still do. Because there's still crazy ideas of white supremacy and anti misogynistic feelings that go after women and people of color and all this, that white men should rule everything. It's like, you know what, we had our time and we screwed everything up, so let's move. let's
Speaking of misogyny, speaking of misogyny, we got to talk about Chaplin.
Mm-hmm.
Chaplin was a genius. Chaplin was at his height, was the most popular movie star in the world. But not an admirable human being.
No, he was not a good man.
He was terrible to his children,
Yes.
terrible to his wife. He was leaving his wife as he was making this movie.
Uh-huh. And he was
He
married to her.
He was
He
married,
was married
to
to
Paulette
Paulette
Goddard.
Goddard. And it's like, let me cast you in this movie. By the way,
Yeah.
I'm
It
leaving
was-
you for a
it-
woman named Una.
It was, yeah. It was dissolving. It was falling apart as he was making this movie. And there was, but like I say, he was an extremely difficult person to like. Let me put it this way. If he were working today, he would have been a victim of Me Too.
Oh, and fully rightfully so. He was a terrible womanizer. Like,
Yeah.
he was he was just the worst. And it's funny, I have his autobiography and I've read little bits of it. It's like, if you could ever write your own story to omit all of the worst parts of yourself, that is it. Like, like I think even some of the other self-aggrandizing directors of the time that wrote autobiographies would put in a little bit like, well, I have a little bit of a booze problem, or
Yeah.
you know, maybe I chased a couple of women around too much, and not
The
Chaplin.
word sponge clean.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've read it myself.
Yeah, it's
He 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 fell into anybody that is that public, anybody that is that popular at that time could pretty much have anything they wanted.
well, sure, yeah. I mean, he was even wasn't he going with Marion Davies while she was with Hearst? I
So I
mean,
believe so.
like he there's a really clever picture that Peter Bogdanovich did. It's the last fiction film that I know of that he directed, called The Cat's Meow. That takes
Good movie.
place. Yeah, it is. It is really good. And Eddie Izzard plays Chaplin, I think, and he does it so well. And like, there's all these back, you know, romances going on, and it was what was going on back then. And in some very few cases, the women did have say and power in how they approached these relationships, and utilized their sexuality for their own benefit. But most of the time it was just, you got to do this or you'll never work again.
Right.
So I want to, the saying he would be a victim of Me Too, he victimized others.
Well, I mean, what I mean is
He would have
I
he
should
would
say
have been
victim. I'd
taken.
say
He
he
would
would
he
have
would
been
have
the
been taken
spotlight
down.
of,
Yeah,
yeah.
he would have been. Yeah, he would have been one of the people taken down by
Victim is probably
this.
the wrong word. I regretted that as soon as I said it. But he would have been in the middle of Me Too.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
He would
yeah,
have followed Weinstein and Kevin Spacey.
yeah. Because
So
he would not have been one of those, one of the guys that are out there going, yeah, people need to speak up. He would have been like Terry Gilliam out there going, maybe it's gone too far.
Yeah. Well, I said earlier that by the time he made The Great Dictator, Chaplin was a legend in his own time. That was not unfounded
No.
because he created the movie star.
Mm-hmm.
His image, at one time, the most famous image on the planet was the tramp.
Mm-hmm.
Was the most famous image on the. But he was the world's first true movie star,
Mm-hmm.
and it was because he was a film artist who took his craft seriously at a time when film was essentially a second-rate novelty.
Right, right, right.
He was helping to turn film into an art
Mm-hmm.
when it was just an arcade attraction.
Right.
You walked you walked into a place. You had this little box. You put your eyes down on the little box, and you turned the crank, and you saw the film. That was basically what you saw before Chaplin. Chaplin was he created these films through these short films with the Max Sennett
Mm-hmm.
to create a specific character at a time when characters were just grotesque.
Right, right, right.
You just put on a mustache, you put on a hat, and you did funny stuff. Keystone
Mhm.
Cops kind of thing.
Right.
He developed into his character, this little tramp character, an ability to draw out a sense of humanity and commentary,
Mm-hmm.
so that it it was aimed at those who were essentially down to nothing,
Right.
people who felt themselves out of the system or out of immigrants mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Silent film was a great place for immigrants because
Oh, it
there
was
was
the
no
great
translation.
equalizer.
It was a
Right.
great equalizer,
Yeah.
and he created this character that they could identify with, who broke the rules in a system that was determined to strangle their ability to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a character that dealt with the world on his own terms, occasionally breaking the rules, but never forgetting who he was.
Right.
And
He was
in doing
he was the window repairman who had a kid break windows so that he could go get money for repairing a window.
right, right, and he, in doing so, again, became the most famous man in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1919, joined with Steve W. Griffith, Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, and defied the studio system by creating
United Artists Pictures.
United Artists. And they were all able to. It was run by the talent.
Mm-hmm.
It was a studio run by the talent, and it ran for 60 years until it was destroyed by the movie we're going to talk about next week.
Yep.
Which we'll get to. But Chaplin,
Unfortunately, though, I mean, it did go through various stages of getting owned by MGM, and different studios would absorb UA. And it's still sort of it's made a couple of comebacks since Michael Cimino, but it's
it's never been the glory. It's just never been what it
No.
was.
no.
And it was the studio that was home to, Some Like It Hot.
Mm-hmm.
It was the studio that was home to the James Bond pictures, the Rocky pictures, the Woody Allen pictures.
Mm-hmm.
It was home to all of these great films. And over the years, went through all of these different threats to its autonomy, because United Artists trusted the director, trusted its filmmakers,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't do what the other studios did, which is these bosses who made all the decisions. Like I say, it was given to the talent,
Mm-hmm.
and it was started by four of the most famous people in the world,
Mm-hmm.
headed by Chaplin.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, getting back to the Great Dictator, had to fight for this film.
Yeah.
Very vehemently had to fight for this movie to get it made because people were nervous about it.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to fight for the ending.
Yeah, which he
Which
was
is-
not the Jewish barber, nor was he Hinkle. He was Chaplin addressing the world.
It's a little confusing
It
because
is.
there's a turn in the film where the Jewish barber crosses paths with Hinkle, and people think that Hinkle is the Jewish barber because they've been looking for him,
Mm-hmm.
and they drag him off, presumably to the concentration camp. And I think because the Jewish barber ends up in the uniform.
Right. And they're trying to get to the fictionalized version of Austria, because that's quote unquote that's still a free country, Austerland, I think. But he's with Schultz, and they end up getting pulled into this rally that Hinkle was supposed to make a speech to, and he's like, I can't talk. He's like, no, you've got to. It's the only
Because
way
Garbage makes a speech.
Yeah.
that's horrendous
Uh-huh.
about, about Aryan purity and
Yeah,
just,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and it's just, it really stabs this man in the heart. He's like, I can't make this speech.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets up and he starts, and he breaks the fourth wall.
He does. In a way, it's not it's not necessarily entirely outside of the Jewish barber's character.
He's still a Jewish barber, essentially, but he's,
Essentially, but the you get the impression, and at the time, this was a very this was considered an incredibly inartistic way to end this movie.
nobody else could have done this.
No, no.
Nobody else would have been allowed to do this.
And he speaks for 5 minutes at least on the importance of togetherness and equality and rejection of fascism and rejection of totalitarianism and rejection of racism and
he takes it to another level because he mentions black man and white.
right, yeah, and
It's also going on at the same time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was. It's really one of the most beautiful speeches you could ever hope like that. It's kind of upsetting that you don't actually that's not one of those in the those monologue books that you can buy for audition pieces. It's kind of a shame that this isn't more well known as one of those pieces that, you know, this and To Be or Not to Be are the two that people would do most often to audition for a piece. Like everybody knows it.
I read in preparation for this Roger Ebert's great movie column about the Great Dictator.
Mm-hmm.
And he had deep, deep problems with this. Because through the narrative thrust of the film, it does break the spell a little bit because he's saying for him it kind of destroyed the ending of the film. It didn't for me.
It doesn't for me either.
Because I'm looking at the texture of the time.
Mm-hmm.
There is a desperation in his voice when he's making that speech. There's a desperation coming from him that the rest of the world needed to have at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And he's crying out for justice in the world, equality in the world, at a time when justice and equality were second rate, or seeming to be second rate.
They existed in lip service, but really...
It existed in lip service. Now, what is ironic is that speech turned on him.
Mm-hmm.
Because when the war was over and they were looking at this film and they were reevaluating, there were people during the Red Scare who took this speech as a rallying cry for communism. Based largely around his affirmation of Joseph Stalin.
Right.
And this led, in a lot of ways, to his exile.
Mm-hmm.
And he was exiled from America. He exiled from America until the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that he fought for this speech on justice and equality, and it ended up being a downfall for him.
Right. Which is sad.
Which is very sad.
That, you know, a person who just wants equality for all, well, that means that you're our enemies. Wait,
right.
What?
No.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't follow that. Could you
I think what they were drawing
over that?
I think what they were drawing from was the end of the speech where he calls for everyone to unite. which
Yeah.
sounds very much like the very last line in the Communist Manifesto.
Mm-hmm. Workers
I
of the
think
world
that's where they were
unite.
drawing
Yeah.
that. What?
Workers of the world unite.
Yeah, I think that's where they were drawing that from.
Probably. There was a whole lot of conjecture going on in the McCarthy era.
Yeah, and it's isn't it amazing that the communist scare was so powerful that it could even take down the most famous man, one of the most famous men in the world.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, he still made films
He
because
did.
because to be honest with you, getting to his films, I love Monsieur Verdoux.
I do too. Oh, I love that movie.
I adore it. I only saw that one a few years ago. I absolutely love it.
I've seen that one a few times. I have the Criterion Blu-ray of that. Criterion has put out a hefty chunk of his feature films, and I have the Blu-rays for all of them because I Monsieur Verdoux is so funny and so dark, and that might end up being an episode at
All
some
right, let me
point
ask
too.
you this though: is there a
Yeah.
film of Chaplin that you just don't care for?
You mean aside from A Countess in Hong Kong?
Aside from A Countess in Hong Kong, yeah. Nobody likes that
He didn't like that one. Um, Limelight, or what is it? A King in New York kind of drags. That was his. That was the one that everybody was like, "Oh, this is proof that he's." That was the one that got him kicked out. Um, Limelight has some great moments, but it's too long. That and King in New York are just too long. They're over
one.
2.5
Limelight seems
hours.
to me just to be an excuse to get him and Keaton together.
Which that sequence is brilliant and worth the
That
price of
sequence is
admission
brilliant,
alone.
but it always seems to me like the movie was mounted on the idea of getting them in the same room.
It's possible. But you know what? I can't
I'm
really fault that because nobody else was going to do it, so Chaplin might as well.
I'm not a fan of the circus.
That's a
It's
yeah.
okay. The year that it came out was 1927.
Mm,
Was not a great year for movies.
no.
The circus, and that was the one that he received an Oscar for that.
A
One of the
special
very first
Oscar
Oscars
for
for that.
writing, directing, producing, starring and composing.
I think that was just because it was Chaplin.
Yeah.
But it's okay. It's just not. I've seen
It's
it once. I don't need to see it again.
yeah, I've seen it once. It's funny. It surprised me that Roger Ebert included that in his
Yeah.
great movies. Um, and I don't believe Monsieur Verdoux made the cut, but the circus
Mm-mm.
did. That
Monsieur Verdoux made it onto Armchair Oscars.
ah,
It was my favorite film of that year.
I could believe that. It's
I
what
think
was
it was
that? 46,
47.
47. Hmm.
That one and City Lights made it onto my Armchair Oscar site, and because those are my two favorites, and also I still love Modern Times.
I do love Modern Times.
I guess we're doing recommendations now.
I guess we are. Watch everything
um,
Charlie Chaplin did.
Here's the thing, though. Here's another thing, though. In my mind, you've seen a lot of actors play Charlie Chaplin.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, there's few to none who've ever done it right.
Yeah.
I didn't like Chaplin with Robert Downey Jr. because I thought it was just
Attenborough went a little too mushy with it.
he was mucking around in a lot of tabloid garbage, and I
Right,
just
right.
I wanted to see a film about his filmmaking genius at least, and it was sort of a subplot.
I think Robert Downey Jr. was good in the role,
He was.
but the movie itself is a little exploitive. Yeah.
It was just dealing mostly with his personal problems rather than anything that he did on the screen, and I didn't care for that one. Catch Me Out, I liked. Eddie Izzard does a fine job,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't beat the real thing. It's like watching somebody play Muhammad Ali. You just can't, it's a personality you're so familiar with, and
You're right, right, right,
you can't duplicate it,
right.
you know. And uh, but in any of Chaplin's films, you should do what I did. And here's what I recommend: find a DVD of his short films.
Mm-hmm.
Pick up some of his short films because those are, if you've seen Chaplin's films, the short films are probably the ones you've seen the least,
Right.
and there's a lot that you've missed. Because let's face it, he made what 200 of those. I mean, they were
Right, yeah. In direct contrast to his feature films, of which he only made what 8.
yeah
Uh, his his shorts, I mean, with great artistic integrity, cranked them out.
yeah yeah cranked them out like hot dogs. I mean, they were
I mean,
um,
you kind of wish that some of them were feature length, like Shoulder Arms, but they might they some his shorts were distinctively conceived to be shorts.
right.
It's like sometimes you see a short film and you're like, I could watch that for 90 minutes. And other times
Yeah,
you watch a 90-minute long movie and you're like, I should have only been watching that for 15
this
minutes.
could be over in 20 minutes. He was a man of body language, of pantomime, of just brilliant. Um, Even The Great Dictator, you can see this. His timing, his comic timing was brilliant. One of my favorite short films is a movie called The Rink,
Hmm.
Rink, where he's at a roller rink and he's on
Hmm.
skates and he's doing
Hmm.
this beautiful little ballet around these people. It's kind of wonderful. And but like I say, find a DVD with a lot of his shorts and sit down and spend an evening with it. I guarantee you, and that's what I did. And I guarantee you, it can be magical.
Yeah,
It can be kind of wonderful.
it's a lot of fun. I've even sat down with my son. It was maybe about a year and a half ago, and we watched The Kid, which I had only seen like the first half hour of it, and it's not that long of a movie in the first place. But I sat him down and I'm like, well, I bought this Blu-ray, and damn it, I'm gonna watch it. And so I sat him down, and we put it on, and we watched it, and he was just laughing the whole way through. It was so
Confession
much
time.
fun. You haven't seen
I've
The
never
Kid,
seen The
have
Kid.
you?
I just have never gotten around to it. I have it, but I just have never seen it.
It's wonderful. I recommend it.
It's not by any other reason. It's just something I just never got to.
Well,
I want.
that was a huge reason that I hadn't either. I'd had it on DVD for years, and I just didn't get around to it. And I'm like, well, I bought the Criterion Blu-ray. I've got to watch it now.
Well,
And
it's a silent film. Silent films are like foreign films. You have to give them your time and attention. You
right,
can't do other things for your.
but even though like you're looking at it like some silent films, there's no excuse for not watching them because they're under an hour long.
Right.
It's like
Right.
you have that much time no matter what. You can always give yourself 50 minutes to an hour to concentrate on something. It doesn't it's it's not even like it's not watching La Dolce Vita, which is like 3
Right.
hours in Italian. It's it's
Or Hammercord.
oh, well, that's 2
Well,
hours.
Hammercord is a movie. Some of these foreign films demand your attention because they
Mhm.
are so detailed. Chaplin wasn't exactly detailed, but I mean,
No.
it's a silent film, and you do need to watch it. By the way, I want to make one little warning. If you do find Chaplin films, and one of the greatest is The Gold Rush,
Mhm. Oh,
do
yeah.
not, do not pick up. Make sure you do not pick up the one that has sound attached.
See the he did yeah agreed. The first time I ever saw that was on video, and it was the 1942 recut
Yeah,
where
yeah, that's
Chaplin pulled out all of the intertitles, strung it together, composed a score, and narrated.
Yeah.
And because he wanted the Gold Rush to be what he was best remembered for, so he tried to bring it into the age of the talkies. When the silent version, now the Criterion Blu-ray on that has both versions. So if you and I think that the DVD probably would too. Don't go for the 1942 recut because
Watch it if you're curious, but don't watch it if
yeah,
you've never seen it.
that was unfortunately the first time I ever saw it, and I watched it just because they didn't have the silent version on the VHS. It was
Yeah.
that Centennial collection that came out on VHS, and I watched it, and then I never watched it again until I until I bought the Criterion. I'm like, yay, the silent version!
Yay! It's funny now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a curiosity. If you've seen the Gold Rush, it's a curiosity. It's not a necessity.
No.
But yeah, Chaplin, his work is inimitable. You can't. A lot of people love Keaton a little more. I like Chaplin
I like both of them.
for different reasons.
I'm one of the people that tends to split the line when somebody says, you know, there's two camps. You like this thing or this thing. I'm usually right down the middle.
Well, with Keaton and Chaplin, it depends on what you're looking for.
Well, yeah,
Keaton generally was straight up comedy.
yeah. He didn't do pathos. He didn't really go in for the romance and stuff. He made expert comedies.
Right.
And the Keaton fans will often say that Chaplin is too schmaltzy and too
like
sentimental. And Chaplin fans will say that Keaton lacks substance and depth.
Well, you're stone-faced.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in Keaton's movies too, and we might get to one of those, either Steamboat Bill Jr. or maybe The Navigator or something. But
I'll tell you who I want to get to. This goes into, again, we're deep in the middle of recommendations. I like Harold Lloyd.
So do I. Safety
Harold Lloyd
Last
is
is brilliant.
brilliant.
Oh yeah,
Pure genius.
yeah.
And Safety Last is one of the best comedies ever made.
Yes, it is.
That's the one
Yes,
where he's
it
doing the
is.
human fly act.
Right, and he's hanging
one of
off
those
the
movies-
clock.
Yeah, it's one of those movies where even if you've never seen it, you've seen it somewhere.
Uh huh.
It's the one where he's on the side of a building hanging from a clock.
Mm-hmm.
And
That movie
yeah,
is great. Oh, I love that one.
great. It was terrific. I love that movie to death. But anyway,
Yeah. Those, if you're looking for a theme night of World War II comedy, there's not a lot.
here's
But
the funny thing. You could put this back to back with Triumph of the Will. It's not that much different.
it's not, because you can laugh just as heartily at Triumph of the Will, but then you also kind of feel like you're going to wet your pants in terror from watching that.
It's just as much of a cartoon
Yeah.
as The Great Dictator. Honestly, it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like you're watching. It's like you're watching one of the old Superman serials.
Mm-hmm.
From Max Fleischer. It's Triumph of the Will is bizarre in every way. It would be an interesting. It'd be an interesting double bill with The Great Dictator.
It would. That, and definitely Ernst Lubitsch's To Be or Not to Be. Don't do the Mel Brooks one, because
I like the Mel Brooks movie. But watch the Ernst Lubitsch if you have to watch that.
Mel Brooks. I love Mel Brooks, but he ain't Jack Benny.
No.
And Anne Bancroft ain't Carol Lombard. So,
But who is?
yeah, right. So those definitely. I think that might be a very funny back-to-back feature.
Oh yeah.
That would be a good night.
A fun evening.
So I think that about wraps it up here for us on the Pod Bay Doors on the Great Dictator Jerry. What have we got coming up next week?
Well, I mentioned it before. We're going from the man who helped to advance United Artists to the man who helped destroy it. We're going to dig into a very strange and bizarre film. It is Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate.
Which I still have not seen.
It is one
It's
of the
three.
most
It's
notorious
3.5 hours of.
3 hours and 42 minutes long to get the Criterion edition.
Yeah, which is what I have to watch. Yeah.
It was not. It was hated for reasons that were unfortunate. It was
I'll
decried by
grant that.
critics for reasons that were not. For reasons that really had nothing to do with the movie itself. It was a movie whose production history really sunk it before it could ever get a chance to be seen by the public.
Right. Right.
And people, and that's thanks to home video, people have gone back and they've done a reevaluation of the film. It is now admired far more now than it ever was when it first came out.
Yeah.
So people are making up their own mind. Was the bad publicity fair? Were the bad reviews fair to this film when it came out? Or were they just condemning a good film because of what they had heard about it?
Yeah. I mean, and the thing that I want to focus on in that is not to say that the people at the time got it wrong, because the people at the time got it right for their time.
Mhm.
Where they, anything can be picked back up and reevaluated, and
I don't know if they were right at the time either.
we'll see. I still haven't watched it, so it'll be a reevaluation for you, because I know you spoke on it on a
Yeah,
fellow
I did an
critics
interview
podcast.
with the online movie show with Bill Hall. I'll post a link to that where we talked about it for about half an hour. Doug and I are going to talk about it at length, but it's
So
mostly going to be just our evaluation of the movie and was it fair to condemn it as the way that the critics did.
yeah. So we've got that coming up. We promise the episode will not be as long as the finalized cut of the film. I don't think I could do that.
It's not that much to talk about.
Unfortunately, that's part of the problem with the movie. But we'll be getting to that, and once we're done with that, we're launching into a.
Because after Heaven's Gate, it's Star Trek month. We're talking about, in the month of May, we're going to be talking about every single freaking Star Trek movie that's out there.
Yes.
I think there are
Yes.
12 of them by this point.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So that I'm really looking forward to that, because
I've been looking forward to that.
this Star Trek is one of those things where for me it's the same as Chaplin Keaton. It's like it's one or the other, but I go down the middle. It's like it's Star Wars or Star Trek, but I'm right in the middle. I've been I if I had to pick one over the other, I would pick Star Wars, but I've been a huge fan of Star Trek for many years. And,
I've given weekends just to the Star Trek movies.
It's so that's going to be fun, and that's going to be the month of May. So that's pretty much what we have coming up. There's not much more to tell. We do have planned out for a couple of weeks in June, but we'll get to that when we get there. We'll get there when we get there. So on behalf of my co-host Jerry Dean Roberts, film critic for armchaircinema.com, armchairoscars.com, and overthinkingoscars.wordpress.com. You can find all of his writings there. You can find him on Twitter at armchaircma. And on behalf of myself, Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for talkmovietome.com, you can find me on Twitter at talkmovietome1. You can find all of our back episodes of the Pod Bay Doors at www.thepodbaydorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can find the podcast on Twitter at pod_bay. Okay, so I did that without writing any of it down.
You don't know how to use a computer.
That about wraps it up for us today. We thank you very much for listening, and the Pod Bay Doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.